After watching the Raycevick video about Max Payne 3, I had to replay it, which made me extremely angry, leading to this long rant, and then I had to replay Max Payne 1 and 2 to cheer myself up. Somewhere in the proceedings I drew parallels to F.E.A.R, which led to playing more games and making more rants. Buckle up, it's about to get stupid. Max Payne 3 is a total failure. It's a failure of story and a failure of gameplay, and since both real Max Payne games were stellar in both departments, that's hugely fucking disappointing. Max Payne 1 and 2 are stylish noir detective stories with awesome gameplay developed by Remedy Entertainment. Max Payne 3 is some kind of weird semi-interactive movie about economic inequity in Brazil, developed by Rockstar. To bring you up to speed if you need it, which you probably don't, Max Payne's wife is murdered at the beginning of Max Payne 1, and then he kills his way to the top of the conspiracy responsible for her death. In Max Payne 2, he's a burnt-out detective on a downward spiral of booze and pills until he reconnects with Mona Sachs, the femme fatale from the first game he thought was dead. In true noir style, Max falls for Mona and kills everyone who stands to keep them from each other. Max Payne 2 has two endings, a good ending and an okay ending. In the okay ending, Mona is killed by Vladimir Lem, but Max has finally put his past behind him and moves on.
I had a dream of my wife. She was dead, but it was all right.
In the good ending, which you get by beating the game on Dead on Arrival mode, Max puts his past behind him and moves on with Mona, who survived her injuries.
Something that gives you a reason to go on.
NYPD, freeze!
Easy! Don't move!
We need a paramedic team here. We have 2 survivors.
In the stylistic world of Max Payne, it's not really important what happens after this. At the end of Max Payne 1, Alfred Woden pulls some strings to get Max off the hook. We don't know what happens to Max and Mona at the end of Max Payne 2. Ultimately, it doesn't matter how, we just know they're alright. Since they only kill gangsters and shadowy criminal organizations, it wouldn't be hard to explain it away for a hypothetical Max Payne 3. But we never got a Max Payne 3, we got a shitty Rockstar game instead. Aside from a few hidden clues off the beaten path, Max Payne 3 doesn't seem to acknowledge the second game at all. I get the impression that whoever wrote Max Payne 3 didn't really like, or maybe didn't really play, Max Payne 2 and just wanted to make their own sequel to the first game, and to hell with established canon. Max Payne 3 is almost like Marathon Infinity. Maybe the second game happened, and maybe it didn't. MP3 disregards the good ending of Max Payne 2 completely, and the bad ending mostly. Max is back to where he was at the beginning of Max Payne 2, drunk, depressed, and on a downward spiral, only this time he's retired. That's when he's offered a cushy job protecting a rich family in Brazil! Woo! That's fucking noir. I'm kidding, of course, this isn't noir at all. It's whatever you call that thing that makes me want to kill myself and then everybody else in that order. So not only is transposing Max Payne to Brazil wildly inappropriate, Rockstar's social conscience means the whole game is about a family of rich Brazilians who nobody cares about. Look, I'm not opposed to games with something to say about the world we live in. I may not agree with the message, and I may think it's one of the most self-indulgent types of slacktivism, but I think games are a perfectly cromulent medium for telling stories with a message. Hell, one of my favorite movies ever is a 3-hour-long tract about how the diamond business is amoral and stupid, which is a fact. Hey Shane, I don't want a friend in the diamond business. Get a job that doesn't victimize dumb American women and literally everybody in Africa. However, for the love of God, don't leverage the good name of an existing franchise to sell some completely unrelated morality tale. And like every other Rockstar story, this game quotes liberally from a film somebody on staff must have liked, in this case Man on Fire. In case you haven't seen it, let me summarize the movie. It's Max Payne 3, except it stars Denzel Washington, and because it was directed by Tony Scott, it's basically a 2-hour headache pressed to a DVD-ROM. Rockstar are like the Quentin Tarantino of games development. They both make gritty, violent, quirky works of fiction that are a complete fucking ripoff of other people's work. Max Payne 3 is absolutely not about Max Payne at all. This has nothing to do with the character and less than nothing to do with the story he's lived through so far. The weird caricature in this game is Max Payne is viewed through the lens of Rockstar's depressing brand of realism, taking a stylized character out of a noir story and treating all their quirks way too seriously. Oh my god, what if Max was like addicted to pain medication? Prescription medication abuse is a serious problem in this country. And what if we set it in Brazil? The favelas are so sad. I feel like I'm doing a Gavin McInnes libtard voice. Dude, just take a step back and realize how fucking insane it is that Max Payne 3 takes place in Brazil and is about corruption in a police anti-drug unit. What the fuck? It makes about as much sense as Season 4 of Miami Vice. And for the story to even work, Max has gone from being a savvy noir detective to being a naive retard. Just like with Spec Ops: The Line, the plot twists in Max Payne 3 only work because the game hides relevant details behind a flashback. Towards the end of both games, they all of a sudden bust out with, "Oh, sorry, forgot to tell you that this happened." Jesus Christ. Right Better. I don't want to read your first draft. Just in terms of story, I think Max Payne 3 could have been a pretty decent Man on Fire ripoff if they just took the Max Payne license out of it. They could even keep James McCaffrey as the voice and likeness of the main character. If you pretend this is a standalone story about a drunk ex-cop named Max Payne, it's actually a really good story. The gameplay still sucks 6 feet of noodle, which we'll get to in a minute, but the story has merit on its own, and James McCaffrey is still insanely good as Max. He even looks enough like Timothy Gibb, the likeness of Max in the second game, that it's not weird or anything. I said in my original review of this game a long time ago that I like the way Perseus and Max interact. Perseus is a cool character and their banter is funny and really keeps the introduction of this brand new weird character from being too jarring.
These guys are seriously financed.
Yeah, I noticed. I'll get you one for Christmas.
Of course, the dialogue is completely unlike Max Payne in specific or noir in general, but remember, this isn't a noir game. It's a Rockstar game about a drunk retard named Max Payne who accidentally most of Brazil. And as cool as Perseus is, he kind of wanders in and out of the story with no real direction. Max Payne 3 does have great music, which is sort of an incidental detail and not really a redeeming feature. After all, the first 2 games, especially the second one, also had great music. Max Payne 3's music is stylistically different, but I seriously don't mind that as it fits the story. Yes, I hate the story and the idea of Max Payne is filtered through Rockstar's socially aware cynicism, but I'm not going to blame the music for that. But even if you try to pretend that this game is an alternate history Max Payne 2 or just an interactive version of Man on Fire, you still can't get past that fucking cemetery level. Rockstar uses the precedent for non-linear storytelling from the first 2 games and includes a midpoint flashback to Max and Perseus running afoul of New Jersey gangbangers before they washed up in Brazil. And in this mission, you end up in the cemetery where every named character in the series is buried. You can find graves for Max's wife and child, as well as for Vinnie Gognitti, Nicole Horn, and even for Detective Winterson. So, Rockstar confirms that Max Payne 2 did happen with 2 lines of lip service. Max has this to say when he visits his wife's grave.
I still hadn't really forgiven myself for the Mona business.
All that Mona business. Wow, that's outrageously dismissive. Hey, you know that amazingly good game with the superb gameplay and awesome story that you loved? Well, fuck that game. All that Mona business. Fucking kill yourself. You spend like an hour of Max Payne 2 playing as Mona, and it was fucking great. 50% of the Max Payne story is Mona business.
We'd only been married a short time. By now, she'd been dead longer than I knew her.
Yes, good point, game. Why is Max still this much of a fucking wreck? It's almost as if you put Max in stasis right before the credits of Max Payne 1 and are just now thawing him out. And if you visit Winterson's gravestone, it gets even fucking worse.
The truth was, it was her or Mona. And I made a very bad call.
What the fuck? Did you even fucking play Max Payne 2, you fucking retards? Remember how Winterson was in bed, both figuratively and literally, with the Russian mob and the cleaners? Remember? Even if Max wasn't involved with Mona at all, Winterson would still have been a bad guy. Why the fuck does Max regret shooting an actual fucking villain? What the fuck is wrong with him that he thinks he should have sided with fucking Winterson over Mona?
I'm on my way to the construction site now.
Winterson?
I'll do it. I'll take care of them both for you.
Mona, who helped him get revenge for his wife's death in the first game. Oh no, that was a bad call. He should have helped Winterson and Vlad take over the inner circle and tighten their death grip on the criminal underworld. Oh my god, I can't believe they fucking got away with this. The idea that there may be somebody out there who thinks Max Payne 3 is a good sequel makes me sick with rage. Rockstar, you fucking cunts, if you ever went out of business, I would dance on your grave. So, I mentioned that the gameplay in Max Payne 3 is fucking awful, which is true, but it was almost really good. Most of the runtime of Max Payne 3 is unskippable cutscene bullshit. I spent most of the game screaming, "Let me fucking play!" And then when you finally do get to play, give me my fucking rifle back. If I try to replay this game just to enjoy the action, I'm still filled with rage because it will not ever let you fucking play. Gameplay sequences are preceded by endless cutscenes that you can't fucking skip until the game is loaded, apparently, which takes exactly as long on a high-spec machine now as it did on a low-spec machine when the game was released. And even when you're actually in the level, the gameplay gets interrupted constantly by little tiny cutscenes which take away control from you. So not only are you not playing without interruptions, but those interruptions very regularly end right at the start of a fight, so you don't get to choose when to enter a fight or your position. Almost all of them are designed so that you're meant to use one shoot dodge or bullet time sequence to pop the heads of every bad guy in the room, which makes a lot of the gunfights really fast and not that exciting. The levels are detailed and usually have some cool destructible shit, but it seems like every fucking encounter starts with you already in bullet time, and the expectation is that you line up headshots and end the encounter in a few seconds. And when you actually get to play, the most effective technique is to abuse the weird point of view of the game and corner hack all your enemies to death because bullets come out of your reticle and not out of your gun. And in every cutscene, Max puts his rifle away, either holding it in his offhand or just discarding it off screen. So when the fight starts, you're not holding the same gun or combination of guns as you were before the game stole control of Max from you. Combine that with the way the game ends cutscenes basically in the middle of combat, and that means your gun isn't ready. So now you don't get to use your rifle because the pistol is out and the fight has started right now. You actually have to purposefully throw away the opportunities the game gives you if you want to take cover, use your rifle, and have a good shootout. The game is so obsessively controlling it ruins its own shooting mechanics, which is awful because the physics and effects make for some really slick shootouts. Well, I should say it can make for some thrilling shootouts if you play the game in a weird way. Basically, you have to retreat from every fight and then try to rejoin it in a more natural way. Like this scene in the parking garage in the first level where you are torn out of cover and have your long gun unequipped. In the first 2 games, you would run into this group of guys and maybe you'd take cover, maybe you'd start shooting right away, maybe you'd take a compromised route and shoot dodge into cover while shooting, and God only knows which of the game's huge arsenal of guns you would have equipped. One simple shootout can happen an insane number of ways in a good game. In Max Payne 3, you're so thoroughly railroaded that you can't even enjoy what should be a good shooting mechanic. And this scene in the airport where you are forced out of good cover and into bad cover, which also forcibly starts the combat, and your long gun is unequipped. This pairs nicely with the awful checkpoint spacing in this level and the lack of manual saving, which means you get to see Max run like a retard out of cover, rifle held uselessly in his offhand every time you retry it. Or this one, where you enter a room with the obnoxious IT nerd and Max puts away his rifle. Or if you think you've figured out their game by now and ditched the rifle in favor of dual pistols, he puts away his other pistol. Nothing ruins a good shoot dodge like realizing the 2 guns you thought you had is one gun, and by instinctively trying to equip the second gun, you've locked yourself into an animation and now you can't fucking shoot. Or later in the same level where Max starts the lobby shooting spree by jumping out from behind the reception desk. Okay, that's fine because he's got to get out of the way of this speeding jeep. But after the first wave of goons is dead and a heavy soldier jumps out with a machine gun, more on him in a second, you get teleported from the good cover and position you were probably in at the back of the room all the way up to the front of the room, so you start getting fucking shot by the heavy guy immediately. All that distance you created in the previous breadcrumbs worth of combat is gone in the span of a quick cutscene. Oh yeah, and that heavy guy. First of all, oh boy, heavy armored trooper. Awesome. Just what I fucking wanted in a Max Payne game. Blatantly unoriginal and boring as fuck to fight in every game. Oh hey, those were in Spec Ops The Line 2, weren't they? Yeah, I fucking thought so. And despite how much effort went into this game graphically and with the cutscenes, I'll point out not only do characters change guns between fucking camera angles, they also can't hold their guns right in cutscenes. So Perseus will have a MAC-10 in a cutscene and then a 1911 in the gameplay sequence immediately afterwards. Or Max's guns will change from what you actually had to what they wanted you to have when you enter a cutscene after getting to play for a while. But with this fucking MG guy, he holds and shoots the MG by the wrist of the stock. Yes sir, magic fucking fingers. And the worst fucking thing about all this is that there is no justification for the cutscene breaks. It breaks for trivial little bullshit, like characters moving around the environment, or opening doors, or talking about moving around the environment. Like this long-ass sequence where Max and one of the random, unimportant Brazilians with no backstory try to figure out how to get into a bus station building.
Giovanna was a brave girl. She wasn't giving up.
Could have been gameplay. Could also have been a lot shorter if it wasn't gameplay. There's almost no reason they couldn't let the action play out in-game, except that they don't trust the player to be in exactly the right position for the next tiny little micro gunfight scene. If the script calls for Max to round the corner and get surprised by a group of goons, that means you can't even walk on your own. They have to shepherd Max around that corner so the gunfight plays out how they intended. Rockstar's beloved ultra-heavy foot physics means you sometimes judder in place when you try to change direction or move out of cover, and Max is sluggish and hard to control in general. You can't seem to control the direction of your shoot dodge. A lot of the time you'll try to use one directly to one side so you can dive out of cover shooting. Should be simple. But about 50% of the time, Max shoot dodges in some random direction, usually hitting something and aborting the shoot dodge early. Or your shoot dodge is at a weird angle and you can't fucking shoot anything. Sometimes you'll also randomly shoot dodge into enemy fire instead of the direction you intended. It really controls like ass. The animation chaining is cool. It's awesome to see Euphoria Ragdoll getting used in a more visceral shooting-based game than GTA 4, and the way Max can shoot and look around while getting up from prone looks smooth and feels appropriately high risk. But you can't chain everything, and the animation for taking painkillers seems like it doesn't play well with just about anything. Hilariously enough, Max can still animate taking a painkiller in mid-flight through the air. The most frustrating part of the game is a slow cinematic walk through the favelas, which is overlong. A close second is the scene where Max is shot in the stadium, and then staggers around for like a billion years before you get to fucking play again. Getting shot in a cutscene is fine because gamers just understand the disconnect between story and gameplay. Yeah, if you try to show a game to your mom, she'll be confused, but if you've been gaming for longer than a year, you just sort of get it. I don't use the term ludonarrative dissonance because I'm not a huge fucking faggot, but I guess that's what I'm talking about. We're desensitized to it, so when Max gets shot in a cutscene in Max Payne 2, we understand that in the cinematic universe of Max Payne, he doesn't actually get shot all the fucking time. Max Payne 3's smooth flow between gameplay and cutscene breaks down that wall, and it makes it really weird when Max gets shot in the arm in a cutscene, and then is wounded and bleeding out for a while in gameplay. The disconnect is gone because now he's wounded during gameplay, and that loses a ton of impact seeing as you probably finished a previous level with a bullet hole right through the heart. To make this clear for the dummies and the cheap seats, in Max Payne 2 you understand that gunshot wounds in gameplay are minor and cured with painkillers, whereas gunshot wounds in cutscenes are serious and ignore the mechanics of the game. That's normal and makes sense in video game terms. In Max Payne 3 it's nonsensical because gunshot wounds in gameplay are minor and cured with painkillers, except when they aren't. Max Payne 1 and 2 both had dream sequences, which were an incredible novelty, akin to the scripted set pieces of Half-Life 1. I'm sure you could argue this, but I think the first Max Payne was a watershed for storytelling in video games. Max Payne 2 really was a thorough improvement over the first game. A lot of Max Payne fans seem to have the opposite opinion, but I think they might be fucking stupid or something. The dream levels, for example, were totally out of left field when Max Payne came out, but in hindsight they pretty much suck. Wandering around in a blurry maze isn't really gameplay or story, and jumping puzzles on trails of blood floating in a black bottomless pit is atmospheric, but kind of dumb. In the context of the game and the time, these dream sequences are thematic and impressively atmospheric, but actually playing them sucks and they don't advance the plot. The fourth wall breaking scene in Max Payne's second dream sequence is legendary, but ultimately not much more than a quick gag.
You're in a computer game, Max.
The truth was a burning green crack through my brain, weapon statistics hanging in the air glimpsed out of the corner of my eye, endless repetition of the act of shooting, time slowing down to show off my moves, the paranoid feel of someone controlling my every step. I was in a computer game. Funny as hell, it was the most horrible thing I could think of.
So these scenes were impressive for the time, but Max Payne 2's dream sequences are impressive full stop. The dream sequences in Max Payne 2 are much more interpretive. The first one in particular is an amazing fusion of Max reliving a nightmare version of the events of his day, with the sound effects of Mona knocking at the door and the phone ringing integrated into the dream.
I was hiding in a cheap motel. One night, I woke to a knock at my door.
The weak platforming on blood trails is gone, and the dreamlike maze actually has relevance to the story, instead of just being a way to kill time. The dream sequences in Max Payne 2 eschew traditional gameplay in favor of more intensive story, and they do it really well. His guilt manifests as nightmares about being caught by the police or questioned by Bravura and Winterson, and in the dream, Max kills them both so he can be with Mona. I'm having a really hard time writing about how good these sequences are. If you only play one Max Payne game, it should be the second one, just to see how good these sequences are. I don't have the words, just trust me. Max Payne 2 also generally improves on the gameplay of the first game. The shooting is more polished and feels more fluid and dynamic than the first game. The slow-mo mechanic has multiple levels that ramp up as you chain kills together. As time gets slower, Max shoots faster, and when you're at the max level, reloading triggers a badass spin animation. A lot of the time, this animation triggers basically at the end of the shootout, and it's unbelievably gratifying to see the camera spin around, showing falling bodies and a shower of mid-air brass. In the bigger fights, you may get the animation partway through, in which case it's a cool way to get a 360-degree view of the action and take a quick breath to plan your next move. Even more so than in the first game, Max Payne 2 makes running and gunning a viable strategy, and not just on easy difficulties. Being aggressive pays off even on DOA difficulty, and the game just gets more fun when the difficulty level goes up. Max Payne 2 is really fun, and the levels are all great. Max Payne 1 does honestly have some bad levels, and most of the endgame is pretty sucky. Max Payne 2 is nothing but hits all the way through, whereas Max Payne 1 sorta lost the plot and had levels like the Deep Six and the Acer building that really felt out of place, in addition to not being very fun. Max Payne 2 keeps the tone consistent and has amazing action through rundown parts of the city, an abandoned construction site, and the disused Address Unknown theme park. All the levels are also jam-packed with more fun bad guy dialogue to overhear and tons of TVs to watch shows on.
The whole set for a tooth. The only way to do it. Hey, chip one of ours, we go dental on him.
Max Payne 2 contains several TV shows that run concurrently with the plot. Captain Baseball Bat Boy, a whole season of Lords and Ladies, the whole run of Address Unknown, and even a few episodes of Dick Justice.
My lord, please, forgive me. My lady!
I played through Max Payne 3 a few times when it first came out, and a few times to make this video. After the first playthrough, I was disappointed in the story, but I thought the gameplay was okay. After subsequent playthroughs on different modes and difficulties, I really grew to hate it. If you play through Max Payne 3 exactly once, you'll probably enjoy it but be unsatisfied. If you succumb to your desire to play it anymore, the awful, glaring, infuriating flaws of the game become unmissable. They'll haunt your waking hours. By comparison, to make this video, I played through Max Payne 1 and then played Max Payne 2 all the way through 3 times in a row, and I enjoyed each replay more than the last. When I finish Max Payne 2, all I want to do is immediately start a new game and play it again, like Half-Life, Opposing Force, and very few other games. On the second and third playthroughs of Max Payne 2, I skipped the story completely and just got to enjoy a few hours of thrilling gunplay, and the challenge of hard-boiled and DOA difficulties just makes it better. Max Payne 2 is such a phenomenal game. It's been my favorite game of all time since the first time I played it, and I can promise you that will never change, even though the rest of my gaming top 10 is mercurial. You know, there's another game with boring, unskippable story sequences punctuated by epic shootouts: F.E.A.R. Since Gaius has been on my case to do that for at least a year now, and I'll probably never get to it in its own video, let's keep the ball rolling and talk about F.E.A.R. F.E.A.R. is very much like Max Payne in that it's an awesome shooter with a good story, atmosphere, and bitching slow-mo shootouts. If Max Payne is the best John Woo game, F.E.A.R. is a close second. I don't think I need to tell you much about F.E.A.R. It's not some niche game nobody ever played. If you really haven't played it before, it's a horror-themed Half-Life game with a slow-mo mechanic. F.E.A.R. is a very PC-ish PC game. It has a ton of controls. You carry 3 guns at a time, which is, I think, the perfect amount. Of course, if you're on a console, there is no functional difference in complexity between 3 guns and a billion guns. Either way, you'll need a weapon menu instead of a switch button. Everything about F.E.A.R.'s design adds to the visceral feel of combat. Bullet impacts look great and take chunks out of drywall or concrete, and create clouds of dust that hang in the air for a while. Hitting metal surfaces causes a shower of 80s action movie sparks to fly out, and the blood effects in the game are top-notch. For a game with this much blood smeared on the walls, it's no wonder they made sure to get it looking right. One of my favorite touches is how heavy the ragdolls feel. Enemies don't go floating away when killed, they usually just drop on the spot. And when ragdolls hit the ground, there's a heavy-sounding crunch sound effect, something which I think more games should do. I absolutely love F.E.A.R., but I gotta be real with you. I always hear people say the AI in F.E.A.R. is excellent. That's not really true, it's just something dumb people say to make it sound like they're paying attention. The AI in F.E.A.R. isn't that good, the enemies just move too much. At first blush, all the movement looks like it must have a purpose, and that must mean the AI is smart. But it's not. The enemies in F.E.A.R. just run around randomly. They can flank you, but it never seems to be on purpose. Rather, they just seem to run around wildly, and the combat arenas are usually built in a circular way to facilitate this flanking behavior. You can tell the AI's movement isn't purposeful because sometimes they'll decide to hunker down somewhere and refuse to move, even if you're just chipping away at them. Smart AI knows to move when it gets shot. F.E.A.R.'s AI knows to move all the time, and it just gets confused when shot. Getting flanked by the replicas is kind of cool when it happens, but most of the time the AI will start charging in one direction only to change their mind and charge back the other direction. My reaction when playing these games is usually, what the fuck are they doing? You know what game had good AI? Half-Life 1. There's a lot of Half-Life 1 in F.E.A.R. from the plot, to the enemies, to the gunplay, to the everything else. The HECU Marines were very smart for the time. They were vocal, mobile, and could adapt to the player's actions. F.E.A.R.'s replicas really are no smarter than Half-Life's HECU Marines. Enemy chatter makes enemies feel smart, even if it doesn't actually mean anything. In Half-Life and in F.E.A.R., enemies will yell grenade, but that doesn't seem to have any bearing on whether or not they take cover from the grenade. And just because one enemy sees an incoming grenade and vocalizes about it, it doesn't mean his comrades will actually act on that information. The most common enemy utterance in F.E.A.R. is, usually, He's flanking us, which makes it sound like the enemy AI is paying attention. However, if one replica notices you flanking and says something about it, his allies don't reposition to compensate. Your actions trigger a vocalization in the enemies, but not really a change in behavior. It was the same with Half-Life. Both games can tell if you're being stationary and lob grenades at you, but in neither game can enemy squads actually use the units they have available to pull 360-degree security. They always fuck up because they don't really work as a squad. Another game with good AI was Halo, not necessarily because all the enemies were really smart, but because they all had behaviors that made sense thematically. The elites are the closest to being truly smart in Halo, but their status as the honorable warriors means they'll still close for melee combat. Elites will also take cover if you start sniping them, something which basically no game with a sniper rifle ever bothers to include. The grunts are not smart because they're expendable peons, but they still recognize when the tide of combat is turning against them. This isn't a knock against F.E.A.R. The AI is on par with the top tier of shooter AI, and that's a big part of why it's so fucking fun. F.E.A.R. is so fun to play, I'll just say, go fucking do it and leave it there. So F.E.A.R. has excellent action, backed up by an excellent arsenal, and good AI, although not the best. The real problem with F.E.A.R. is that the story kind of gets in the way. It's not even a bad story. It's well told with little dialogues revealing pieces along the way, and it has a good arc with a good ending. And it has one of the best cliffhanger endings of any game ever. A cliffhanger so thematically perfect it doesn't need a sequel, which I don't think you can say about anything. The problem is that the horror theme of the game is developed in little walking haunted house segments between shootouts, where you walk around and some scary stuff happens. The jump scares and atmosphere are very well done and very scary, at least in my opinion, though I know horror is kind of subjective. The thing is, the scare sequences aren't really gameplay, they're just walking cutscenes that sometimes play out in excruciating slow-mo. Like the constant interruptions in Max Payne 3, they take you away from the combat, which is the main attraction, and they do so just to show you things. F.E.A.R.'s jump scares are very scary. Well, at least they're startling, but you're not actually in danger. It's not like in Thief where you're scared because you might die. You're just ambling through a linear sequence of scares with no actual consequences or failure state. The lack of interactivity isn't a huge deal because when the game tries to add some danger to the scare sequences, the only thing they could come up with was swarms of annoying flying ghosts that try to kamikaze you. So, lesson learned, that was even worse than the harmless jump scares. It's not that I want the jump scares to be dangerous to you in any way, I just want significantly less of them and significantly more combat. Or keep the level of combat the same and just shorten the game a bit. Short and sweet is better than medium and kind of savory. I think so anyway. The scare sequences work exactly once, and when you try to replay the game to enjoy some more of that delectable combat, they're just a chore. Where the story of F.E.A.R. really gets interesting is in the expansions and the sequel. After the first game, 2 expansions were farmed out to another developer, and it looked like the franchise was dead until Monolith was able to get the license back for the true sequel 4 years later. The expansions are kind of bullshit. The first one, Extraction Point, isn't god-awful, but it's still kind of repellent. The expansion starts with a really cool setup. It's a direct sequel to the original game and starts after your helicopter crash. You wander the streets in the aftermath of Alma's awakening and the destruction of the Origin facility and see inactive replica soldiers standing around without Paxton Fettel to control them. Then you go into a church and Paxton Fettel is back. The replicas reactivate, and Fettel says, "I know you killed me, but we had to fill the expansion with something." I'm not joking, he literally says that. Okay, not literally, but the subtext of the developer just shrugging their shoulders and clocking out at noon is there. I swear it seems like they made this game on a half day, then went to the park. I don't know, maybe it was nice out? I can't be too critical. It's obnoxious that this happens so soon into the start of the game. Paxton kicks the bucket basically at the very end of F.E.A.R., and it's very rewarding to finally pop a cap in him and leave the replicas leaderless. As a little reward, the game gives you 3 inactive soldiers right afterwards, and you get your little moment of triumph. Yeah, those motherfuckers are done. You did it. So, especially if you jump from F.E.A.R. straight into Extraction Point, Fettel is dead for like 10 minutes, and your hard-fought victory against the replicas is undone as soon as you start to enjoy it. Aside from just being retarded, the game is needlessly cruel. It savagely kills off your 2 companions from the last game in a sort of casually vindictive way. I could see this working for story effect, but on top of everything else, it just feels like a middle finger from Timegate Studios. A big part of it is that these are not Timegate's characters. This is Monolith's story and Monolith's characters. It's a hugely disrespectful move to kill off another author's characters while they're not using them. F.E.A.R 2 was always in the cards for Monolith, they just didn't get the chance until 2009 because of publisher shenanigans. Your Delta Force buddy Holiday gets absolutely murked pretty early on in the game, and then Jin just up and dies randomly towards the end. Since there's almost no dialogue in this game, it seems like they didn't really expect you to care. You're just walking around, and then you find Jin dead surrounded by some weird twitchy monsters. Oh, well alright then. The death of Jankowski in the first game is a slow burn mystery that lasts for almost the entire running time. You never really know for sure that he died, but eventually you have to accept it. The probable death of Jankowski is a big deal. By comparison, Holiday gets torpedoed like somebody pwned him with a console command. Just a quick, fuck that guy, and you move on. Over the course of the game, it becomes obvious that Alma is trying to help you, which she does by killing replica soldiers, who are under the control of Paxton Fettel, whose whole raison d'etre is to help Alma get revenge against Armacam. It's a weird kind of circular bullshit where you and the replicas are both sort of on the same team as Alma, but you both still have to fight against her ghost and shit. Extraction Point's conclusion comes at the end of an interminable walk through a hospital where nothing happens and the annoying kamikaze ghosts from the first game make a return. The game drags its feet to the conclusion. You finally get to the top of the hospital for evac, and the chopper with your commander gets shot down the end. Awesome. So everybody from the first game is dead now, you killed somebody else's franchise. Good work. The plot of XP seems like it closes out the series with finality. At the bottom of the hospital, little girl Alma and teenage Alma reunite, after which the supernatural stuff goes away like somebody threw the breaker. So you look out across the devastated city and get the sense that F.E.A.R is all the way over. Alma wrecked up the place, and now she's at peace. The only dangling plot thread is Paxton Fettel, who is still a ghost as far as I can tell. Those character deaths are the only thing that passes for plot points in this expansion. It's basically a cannonball run to the extraction point with no story developments other than the main characters getting brutalized in a context-free manner. It's about a 4 to 5 hour game where nothing happens and you don't even realize a single objective the whole time. In the first game, your objectives change constantly. Kind of like in Half-Life, your understanding of the situation changes often enough that you feel like you're working towards new things every hour or so. When 5 solid hours of get to da choppa doesn't end with you flying away on a choppa, I don't feel very charitable towards your fucking game. All I really wanted from Extraction Point was more of the epic John Woo firefights, but they couldn't even get that right. The game is filled with sloppy arenas that drop in too many groups of random enemies. A bit of the F.E.A.R magic shines through, but mostly you're just chucking hand grenades as replica squads shuffle out of a spawn closet. They're spawned in such great numbers and so haphazardly they stand inside each other for the first few seconds of each firefight. There are some good shootouts, especially in the subway portion of the game that give some real Max Payne vibes. But like in the first game, the gunfighting is padded out by plenty of scary, spooky story sequences. Now, for the duration of the first game, I was okay with it, because the scares were well done and the story was interesting enough that you wanted to learn more. You weren't just playing for the gunfights. XP doesn't have that. I'll admit, patience isn't my strong suit, and it ran out completely after the first game. The new enemies are pretty flat. More of the replica soldiers have Shy Guy masks on now, but they fight the same as regular troops. The new creepy crawly guys seem like they're going to be interesting when you see them in the beginning of the game, but when you actually fight them, they just turn invisible and rush to melee like a straight-up repeat of the replica assassins. When you kill them, they turn to smoke. I can't explain why, but that just annoys the hell out of me. There are also bigger mechs this time around, but they're still vulnerable to small arms fire, and Extraction Point is very generous with crates full of autocannons or rocket launchers, so that ain't no thing. And then the heavy troopers are supplemented with a new version that has a shield and a minigun. XP also seems like a bit of a mess on a technical level. There are several areas where the engine bogs down and frame rates turn to shit, something which never happened in the first game and certainly shouldn't happen on an octo-core machine with 32 gigs of RAM and a GTX 980, since this computer is 10 years newer than the game is. I'm kind of ambivalent on the guns in F.E.A.R. For the most part, they look good and they all sound awesome, but they have some weird quirks. The pistol is undeniably my favorite gun in the game, and it's modeled after an HK USP. Can't go wrong with that. My own house rules version of F.E.A.R is to play the entire game using the pistol as much as possible. Unfortunately, the game's pretty stingy with extra ammo. The pistols do not fire simultaneously or alternately. They seem to be fired semi-randomly, which feels very real. It feels very John Woo, and is probably the best dual wielding since Halo 2. And the gunshot sound effect for this thing is fucking boss. It's loud and sounds dangerous. F.E.A.R couldn't decide between an SMG and an assault rifle as the bread and butter weapon, so they kinda used both. The SMG is basically an MP5 and holds a very half-life 50 rounds per magazine, but it fires in weird bursts of 3. Most of F.E.A.R's automatic arsenal fires in 3-round bursts, which is a bit annoying and makes the sound effects kinda screwy. The assault rifle in the game is a cool sci-fi version of the HK-SL8. Once again, it fires in strange 3-round bursts, which makes its status as a more accurate, slower firing weapon than the SMG kinda suspect. The other rifle in this game is based off of an Israeli Tavor and has a scope for greater long-range potential. The scope is useful, but it still fires in a 3-round burst, which is a total waste of time and ammunition. I suspect they gave it a stupid, inaccurate, useless 3-round burst so the gun would use ammo faster, keeping it from being too powerful. I see a lot of people online saying the F.E.A.R shotgun is one of the best game shotguns ever. It kind of isn't, though. F.E.A.R's shotgun is a Franke Spas 12, like every game shotgun ever. For random example, Half-Life. The shotgun holds 12 shells, which is way too many, and reloads very quickly regardless of how many shells are left. This is a common video game thing, where shotguns are reloaded with the same number of shells every time, usually 2 shells. The guns in this game also tend to get reloaded partly off screen, which seems a bit cheap. Big surprise, the Spas 12 in F.E.A.R has the stock folded all the time and shoots in pump action mode. The worst thing about it is that F.E.A.R commits a classic video game blunder, where reticule bloom affects the spread of the shotgun instead of the base accuracy. Oh shit, son, that's bad and annoying. You can see that in basically any game with a blind fire mechanic. You can tell this game's obsession with 3-round burst is insane because even the rocket launcher fires that way. 3-round burst rockets. Why? F.E.A.R's special weapons, like the nailed gun, the flak can, and the lightning gun, are all pretty cool. I don't know exactly why the explosions in this game have a gravity lensing effect, but it does make the flak cannon really fun to use. F.E.A.R also has standard grenades, trip mines, and remotely detonated bombs, which adds to the controls pile-up. This game was not meant to be on a console. The new guns in Extraction Point are awful. The laser rifle looks and feels cheaply made. I'll draw parallels to Chrome Spec Force here. The new guns don't match the old ones, and they're noticeably low rent. The laser rifle shoots a continuous beam and blah blah blah. It's just boring. It's just boring. The new minigun is pretty basic, but it doesn't have a spin-up time, which is good. Real miniguns don't have a spin-up time because the whole spinning system of barrels and chambers is always fully loaded and waiting for you to pull the trigger, or push the button as the case may be. The minigun is a full-on super weapon in Extraction Point, which contrasts with the careful balance of the guns in the base game. It's still fun to use, though. There's also a turret grenade, which is weird but fun, similar to the floating turret grenade in Revolution, but less awful, or maybe more like the laptop gun from Perfect Dark. It's fun to seed a combat arena with mines and turrets before the action starts. Enemies seem to have a really hard time hitting the turrets, let alone destroying them, so you can plunk one down and watch an armored minigun trooper get his shit pushed in by an itty-bitty little auto gun stuck to the wall. The turrets aren't accurate or powerful, which makes them feel like the shitty turrets from Revolution, but that doesn't matter too much when they pull aggro like a motherfucker and don't seem to die. Ultimately, I can't hate Extraction Point. I think Timegate did an alright job with somebody else's intellectual property, story, and game engine. I don't think it's their fault if Vivendi fucked over Monolith, so I'll give them credit for turning out an alright product. But Extraction Point really does feel like product more than labor of love. I get the sense that most people like Extraction Point more than I do, but at least we can agree that Perseus Mandate is balls. In Perseus Mandate, you play as not the point man, but rather a sergeant of the F.E.A.R B team. He can still use slow motion, because otherwise the game would suck. The rank structure of F.E.A.R is so out of whack that the B team consists of a captain, a lieutenant, and your player character the sergeant. You get to fight alongside your team for a decent amount of time in Perseus Mandate, and it's not as bad as it could have been. It helps that Captain Rains is voiced by Stephen J. Blum, whose voice adds several points to a game's review score all by itself.
Smooth move. Don't worry, brother. We'll get you out.
It's cool to pal around with some teammates and have them comment on the weird shit that goes on in this game. Of course, you immediately get separated by some contrived bullshit. Bulletproof chain link is my favorite thing ever. Perseus Mandate takes place at the same time of the end of F.E.A.R and part of Extraction Point, and involves the F.E.A.R B team going after some trivial bullshit objective that wasn't important enough to even rate a sidebar in the 2 previous games. With Perseus Mandate, Timegate had an opportunity to ditch most of the horror elements and just make a badass combat expansion to F.E.A.R. Could have been a straight action game with only horror trappings. I don't expect them to leave the horror stuff behind completely, since it's basically what keeps the brand on message, but they could have toned it way down. For example, I don't think the F.E.A.R Team 2 Sergeant should be seeing Alma all over and hallucinating her backstory. He's not really involved in her shit. This needed to be a sidequel with some really clean action and not a lot of story bullshit. The new bad guys in Perseus Mandate are hilariously shit. In addition to replicas, you fight tons of generic mercs, who might be part of the ATC or might just be pulled straight out of an overworked writer's ass. They have terrible new breed Jack Plummer voices and terrible character models with terrible glowing goggles.
Get to cover. Grenade, get down.
They have superpowered ninja versions of same that have way too much health. I mean, just way too much. The first time I fought one, I thought it had to be a boss enemy, which I already fucking hate in any FPS that even dips a toe in realism. Despite not appearing to have armor, they can still tank way too many fucking shots to the face. The new guns are hilariously shit too. The AES rifle looks like an XM8 with a very badly modeled red dot on it. The red dot basically does nothing, and the gun shoots in a really slow, horrible staccato way, which is still 3-round burst if you pull the trigger once, because every fucking gun in F.E.A.R has to be 3-round burst. And the best part is, it fucking shoots like lasers or something and has a blue muzzle flash, and still ejects empty 5.56 brass. Jesus, fuck, how did anybody think this gun was a good idea? This is the worst gun in a game I have ever played. It's so fucking bad, it makes the whole game surrounding it look bad, and it didn't need any help in that department. The other new guns are a boring rotary grenade launcher, shades of Spec Force Chrome here, and a fucking god-awful lightning rifle. It just zaps enemies and requires no real skill or thought to use. The really good new gun is the pistol, which is the same as in the first two games, but they give you tons of ammo refills for it this time around. Perseus Mandate has fights in open city areas that actually let the AI coding behave in a way that looks competent, and I think they added the ability for AI to give suppressing fire, which makes the shootouts feel a bit more dynamic. The combat in this game is really pretty great as long as you're fighting ATC guys in the replicas, but when they put you up against the new mercenaries or those stupid ash ghosts, it's god-awful. I almost think Perseus Mandate has some of the highest highs of the series, but it undoubtedly has the lowest lows. And I might have only enjoyed those shootouts so much because I was using dual pistols through pretty much 100% of the game's runtime. The environments in this game are so cheap looking. It looks like a bad Half-Life conversion or Deus Ex 1. My buddy refers to the F.E.A.R expansions as Dollar General F.E.A.R. That's pretty accurate. I loved F.E.A.R so much that I was salivating for Monolith's follow-up. It was depressing that Monolith had lost creative control over their own story, and for a while they were developing F.E.A.R 2 anyway under the name Project Origin. At the time I was impressed by what they had, but I wasn't confident they would actually be able to release it without legal trouble. When they finally got the license back and F.E.A.R 2 was officially announced, I was stoked. The expansions weren't horrible, but they were clearly non-canon ramblings not made by the real guys, just keeping the franchise alive and generating revenue. Unfortunately, F.E.A.R 2 wasn't quite a glorious return to the franchise. I'm not sure how Monolith's plans for F.E.A.R 2 changed after losing the license and the release of Timegate's knockoff expansions. Unfortunately, I'm not that keen on the story in F.E.A.R 2. If Project Origin was supposed to be something better and it had to get reconfigured, that's a damn shame, and I wish we could have just had a normal F.E.A.R 2 instead of the tepid expansion games. On the other hand, maybe this was always their plan. If that's the case, Timegate, you want to take a crack at making F.E.A.R 2? F.E.A.R 2 is the Alma show through and through, whereas in F.E.A.R 1 she was a kind of foundation of the plot involving the power players at Armacam. In F.E.A.R 2 it's just Alma doing shit and everybody else being dumb and boring. F.E.A.R 2 rewinds the beat to the ending of the first game, putting you in the shoes of a Delta Force guy who goes in with a team to arrest Armacam head Genevieve Aristide right before the Origin facility goes nuclear. Right off the bat, I kinda don't want to play as some other guy. When the story gets transposed to a new group of characters, a lot of basic groundwork has to be relearned, so even if the characters are discovering new intrigue, it's not new to you, the player. It's like the game is catching up to where you are. And since they don't have time to cover the plot of the first game in its entirety, the main characters seem to make a lot of logical leaps. It comes across like they have access to their own Wikipedia page. So you're trying to stop Alma again, only this time with a much less interesting cast of characters. And as you wander from scare to scare, you get to enjoy the tepid, generic combat, and you uncover more layers to the conspiracy. The new revelations in F.E.A.R 2 are pretty pathetic. Oh, it turns out the Super Soldier program was slightly larger than we initially thought. Oh, no? Anything but a slightly broader scope than previously anticipated. Alma gets a little more backstory development this time around, and the hallucination sequences are a little better than before. In addition to fighting replica troops reactivated by Alma, you also fight the ATC troops, who have gone from being corporate security and are now some kind of weird private army whose ranks encompass about half the population of the western seaboard. Their ability to throw bodies at this problem is just obscene and doesn't make any fucking sense. Alma is no longer hell-bent on destruction. Now she wants to have a baby for no reason. Throughout the game, you have to keep Alma from porking your character's brains out, which is not a great mechanic. Never mind that she already had 2 babies, one of whom she couldn't stop trying to kill all the fucking time. Why is this happening? I don't think anybody knows. I think it was just the only thing they could come up with to continue the story after the end of the first game. I guess I don't think Alma should be sympathetic, even though she has a sympathetic background. The sense you get in F.E.A.R 1 is that Alma is a force of nature, lashing out at the world. You can feel bad for what happened to her, but the psychic ghost version of her is definitively a bad guy. That's part of what made Extraction Point confusing and shitty. When Alma helps you but also tears your companions to shreds, I don't end up feeling the way the game expects me to. F.E.A.R 2 infamously ends with your character getting rapified by Alma. I think the only honest reaction to this is a heavy sigh. In retrospect, Timegate closed out the series better in Extraction Point. F.E.A.R 1 has a great cliffhanger. F.E.A.R 2 has a shitty cliffhanger, and I'm not even going to talk about F.E.A.R 3, but Extraction Point actually made the series feel complete. Underwhelming, but complete. I bet we're seeing approximately the story beats they wanted out of F.E.A.R 2, but perhaps with a style of presentation that came afterwards. I have to be honest with you guys, I hate everything about this game. The real problem with F.E.A.R 2 is that the gameplay fucking sucks. I'd consider the story in a F.E.A.R game to be a write-off, so the fact that it was good in F.E.A.R 1 was a nice bonus. In F.E.A.R 2, you have to fall back on the story because the gameplay is bad. This game is so generic. You can barely tell it's a F.E.A.R game. F.E.A.R's expansion packs weren't great, but even a bad F.E.A.R game beats almost any other shooter. F.E.A.R 2 isn't a F.E.A.R game. It's got fucking nothing. Gameplay, none. Story, nothing. F.E.A.R 2 is another basic-ass cinematic shooter game, this time with some jump scares. Even the graphics are worse. The beautiful volumetric smoke and spark effects for bullet impacts, as well as the best bump-mapped bullet holes ever, are all gone. And everything is so cartoonish. I'm not the type to automatically hate on a game for being cartoony, but could they have picked a worse art style? The blood effects look like they're from the wrong game. All the enemies have glowing lights and colors all over them, and the replicas and ATC troops have tons of special unit types with hugely exaggerated features so you can tell them apart. There were several different types of replica you fought throughout the first F.E.A.R game, even discounting the heavies or ninjas or mechs. The regular replicas had several different troops, grunts, recon, urban tactical guys, what have you, which kept the visual variety up throughout the game and made it seem like you were fighting specialized units depending on the situation. You weren't running into a squad consisting of the Heavy, the Pyro, the Scout, and the Demo Man. You were running into a squad of fucking soldiers. The cartoony nature of F.E.A.R 2 isn't just graphical, it's also the way the characters are presented. F.E.A.R was a game about corporate evil. All the bad guys were sinister but human, and that's part of what made the game interesting. In F.E.A.R 2, you have some wild and crazy bad guys, and there are several scenes in which a villain monologues at you from behind bulletproof glass. The new characters are cringy, like an Armacam hacker named Snake Fist, or the Dark Signal squad your character belongs to, all of whom can fucking die for all I care. The evil ATC commander reminds me of the evil military guy from Avatar. They're all less than two-dimensional. And the writing is goofy and fucking terrible.
Even say she covets you. She's a coveter. You're like free pizza at an anime convention.
Wow, buddy. Way to neutralize the menace of your game's central villain. So not only is the writing not stellar, there's also a fucking ton of it because the game is now littered with data pads. Dude, seriously. F.E.A.R was so fucking different from everything else, and now F.E.A.R 2 has data pads? Are you fucking kidding me? All the characters look like they got Gears of War swole, and so did the weapons. They're all chunky and angular. F.E.A.R had a 20 minutes into the future aesthetic. This has a 20 minutes into Deus Ex Human Revolution aesthetic. The guns have the same problem as the guns in the new Deus Ex games, all colored lights and way too many flanges. It's extra stupid because this game takes place at the same time as the ending of the previous game. My beloved pistol has been comprehensively ruined. It's ugly and blocky, you can't dual wield it, and it has some awful, unusable iron sights, which makes me question the decision to even add iron sights to the game. And yeah, I'm on record as saying I like it when a shooter has iron sights, but that doesn't mean I hate games without iron sights. If you're gonna do it this badly, just fucking skip it, dude. The shotgun is ugly, boring, has awful sights, and a reload animation makes it look like Beckett has tiny Trump hands, or maybe the shotgun is just huge. Everything else is just so basic. The AI doesn't seem to be that good anymore, and the shootouts are bland. Slow motion almost seems tacked on. It really isn't that important to the gameplay in F.E.A.R 2. The first F.E.A.R game is one of the most high-intensity shooters ever made, but combat in F.E.A.R 2 is pretty chill, just like playing a Call of Duty or other big-budget shooter. I haven't been this devastated by a sequel since Mass Effect 2. I don't know what they were thinking. The gameplay is awful, the AI is dumb, the enemies are unconvincing, the characters are ridiculous and over the top, which contrasts so painfully with F.E.A.R 1's understated realism. F.E.A.R 2 isn't even a shitty game or anything. It's a competent blockbuster shooter game, and the horror trappings are still unique in the market. But you can't avoid comparison to the first game, and F.E.A.R was like nothing else, except for Half-Life. F.E.A.R 2 is exactly like everything else in all the ways that really count. And I said I wasn't going to talk about F.E.A.R 3, so I won't. Thanks for watching. See you next time. But what about Stranglehold? Yeah, what about Stranglehold? That's just a joke, yo. I actually like the game, but it ain't no Max Payne. Getting flanked by the replicas. God, I wonder how many times I typed replicants by habit in this script. There were several different types of replicant you fought throughout the first F.E.A.R game, even discounting the heavies or the ninjas or mechs. The regular replicants had several... Replicants? God damn, I fucking said replicants so many times. Expansion point. The minigun is a full-on super weapon in Expansion Point. Expansion Point, god damn it. When I made my original review of Max Payne 3, there was a line that I snuck in there about calling his Beretta 92 his favorite since day one. That was sort of a remnant of a joke that I had to cut out. Rockstar released a shitload of promotional material for Max Payne 3, and some of those videos were weapon spotlights, and one of them was about the 1911. And the little promo spot, you know, is like 30 seconds long or something, and includes just a bunch of gameplay footage and some taglines about the gun, like legendary firepower, history, you know, that kind of stuff. And they included a little tagline in there, which was Max's favorite since day one. You know, I'm glad I wasn't the only person to notice it, because apparently a bunch of people sent Rockstar angry letters, and they replaced it with a different version that just omits that little clip. So, by the time that I'd gotten around to actually reviewing the game, I could not find that clip anymore, because they'd taken the video down and replaced it with a corrected one. And it was something that I wanted to reference in this video, but I didn't know if I could still find the clip. So, I just said, forget it, I didn't write it into the script. But right now I'm in the editing process, and I thought, you know, maybe I'll go out and look for it one more time. And I did find it. It was uploaded by EGM, who basically took Rockstar's original video and re-uploaded it, and never bothered to correct or re-upload the proper version later on. So it's still out there. I was able to download it, and I present to you Max's 1911, his favorite pistol since day one, which never fucking happened, of course. And, you know, I can't really shit on Rockstar too hard for that, because that probably was a marketing team mistake and not really a developer mistake. Although just playing the game, you wouldn't know, because the entire New York sequence is just 1911s as far as the eye can see. Anyway, this is something that's been on my mind for about the last 6 years, so I'm just really glad to learn that I didn't in fact imagine the whole thing. That's all I got. Later on.